European CBD market based on a very substantial study, consumer survey that we conducted across Europe late last year. We couldn't be more delighted to have reconvened the dream team that we had for our last webinar, which includes Stephanie Birch from the Deep Nature Project, Andrea Baucher, the CEO of the Deep Nature Project, and Frederick Hendrickson from Mile High Labs. And we will be drawing from their experience, their perspectives, their deep kind of knowledge from operating in the European markets to understand where the European market is today, and critically where this critical market is going. So just a quick overview of our agenda. We have a lot of material to cover over the course of this hour. So we'll spend the first portion of this webinar reviewing the findings from the second part of the study that we conducted with this team, where we've looked at in much more detail the consumer archetypes and specific kind of consumer segments within Europe. But we'll spend a lot of time for a conversation with our panelists, because the European market has been so dynamic that I think it's really important to put all of these insights that we're gaining about the consumer within the broader context of what's happening in this market. We, based on our experience over the last webinar, we had so much great kind of discussion and questions from the audience that we do want to reserve a lot of time for questions here. That said, attendees, if you can look at your user dashboard, there's a Q&A function there. Please start submitting your questions now. Some of them we will get to over the course of our conversation. Some of them we'll reserve for the specific Q&A time at the end of this portion. But please start submitting questions now. We are going to try and reserve as much time to get to them as possible. So to get us started, I'd love for our panelists to introduce themselves. And maybe Stephanie, if you could begin by introducing yourself, and then Andrea can follow.
Yes, okay. Hello, everybody. So my name is Stephanie. I joined Deep Nature last year in July. I have a background in marketing. I used to work for a company that produces and sells organic food. So I'm quite happy to have found a company that combines food, but also food supplement in an organic environment where we want to have a sustainable company, sustainable brands, and where the entire production process is in-house.
Okay, so my name is Andrea Baucher. Hello, I'm the founder and the CEO of the company Deep Nature Project GmbH, and we have a history in 3 steps. So we started with medical hemp in 2011. Before, I did many years of research in the hemp plant, and then we start in 2014. We start with our first CBD products from the industrial hemp, and in 2015 we founded Deep Nature Project GmbH, and now we have the agriculture part, the processing part, the marketing, the sales part, and the mixing part, everything in our company, and do everything from the feed to the end consumer product in our company.
Andrea, we're delighted you were able to join us. I know your schedule is extremely busy, so thank you for making the time. Your perspective here will be invaluable, so thank you. Frederick, please.
Yeah, no, hello everyone. I'm Frederick Hendrickson, VP of International Sales and Business Development for Mile High. I've been with the company for about 1.5 years now, joined to set up the international side of the business. We're Colorado-based, originally extractor of CBD, and now also full private and white label of goods. We're among the world's largest extractors of CBD, and we then acquired a facility last year from Novartis, the Swiss pharma company, to manufacture finished goods as well. So yeah, no, I joined along with a couple of others to head up the international side and build a European presence, and I'm based in London.
Thank you, Frederick. Really delighted to have you join, and particularly given some of the really consequential developments that Mile High has been making in the European market.
Thanks for having me.
So let's talk about the European CBD consumer trends. For those of you who attended our last webinar, you know that this is based on a large study that we did covering this EU market. But to begin with, why CBD and why now? Why is CBD resonating and reverberating the way it is, not just in Europe, but globally? And we think there's a convergence of 7 kind of key factors, key forces that are driving this emerging market. One is just the broader kind of broadening support for legalization for cannabis in general, and CBD specifically, so medicinal cannabis and low THC cannabis, which has been able to garner a lot of support, particularly in more conservative markets. Second is just the volume of science that is affirming that CBD does have not only very strong therapeutic applications, but also a very low risk profile. And so that combination of the applicability across a range of therapeutic conditions, as well as the fact that you don't tend to see a lot of drug-to-drug interactions, you don't tend to see a lot of negative attendant effects, I think has been one of the reasons why you've seen a lot of buy-in. A couple of other reasons why this has been such an appealing market for particularly operators to come into this market. The diversity of applications. I remember when I first joined the cannabis industry formally about 7 years ago, I was speaking to an MD out of Harvard who said, if we had gone into the Amazon last week and discovered cannabis, there'd be headline news, global headlines saying that man has discovered a miracle drug. Now, at the time, it sounded a little hyperbolic, but as the science has affirmed the diversity of ways in which cannabis can be used, both medicinally, therapeutically, for mental and physical health, as well as the industrial applications of the plant, the economic opportunities that legalization of cannabis represents, both for developed and developing nations as ways to stimulate investment, economic development, job creation, has been another reason why, particularly at a time when we're going through this moment of acute economic upheaval, there's been so much interest in the cannabis sector as a quote-unquote recession-proof market. And then finally, just a lot of interest from consumers around ways to improve their health and wellness. And as you see greater interest in an exploration of how to improve holistic health, we think CBD has played a huge role or capitalized on this emerging opportunity, and we see very, very strong opportunity for that growth in the market ahead. So some high-level context on why we think this conversation about CBD is so timely. And now just an overview of the research that is underpinning the conversation we're going to be having today. So we did this survey late last fall, 3,100 respondents representing 17 countries across Europe, accounting for a population of nearly 300 million European adults. So a very large representative base, and part of the beauty of having this much data and having the phenomenal research team that we have at New Frontier is that it's given us a chance to really slice and dice this data in ways that enable us to not only understand the region at the macro level, but also understand in detail some of the specific trends, behaviors within specific regional groups of countries, one, and also two, enable us to segment and archetype the consumers to understand their respective behaviors. And that's what we're going to be talking about today, some of the key insights from the different consumer groups we've identified. So first, an overview of orientation to familiarity with CBD amongst European consumers. The first slice is by age. And it shouldn't be surprising that younger consumers, so those under 55, are much more likely to have heard of CBD and be much more likely to be interested in learning more. But looking at the chart to the right, which I think is really important, is As this market has emerged, we've seen that social networks, so recommendations by friends, recommendations by family members, getting it from friends and family members, have been a critical way in which CBD awareness has been built, and it's a critical way in which people have been learning about CBD for the first time. And there we see a really notable difference, where it's the adults under the age of 35 who have been most likely to be kind of both sharing it with people in their network, as well as to have people in their network who are using CBD. So I'll pause there and maybe turn it to the Deep Nature team and Frederick to see whether you have any kind of perspectives on this differences in age that you're seeing in your markets around consumers and the implications for the CBD market there.
Frederick, you want to go first, or?
I'm happy to. So obviously, you know, at Mile High, we sit on the you can say the more back end side, delivering ingredients or delivering a finished good. We interact less with the end consumer, given how we're positioned. But I would say none of the data that I see here particularly surprises me when you look at both the methods that CBD brands are using to find customers, and also just the general probably higher likelihood of young people to try out products like this. And you know, I would say that anything else it tells me is that there's an opportunity to market something towards the more senior population, given the prospects of what CBD can offer you.
So basically, same for us. It's not surprising, but so we have the insights that a lot of best agers are interested in CBD. They start to use Facebook, which is quite interesting, to get more information, to get more insights. So this is also a quite interesting group for us. They're more aware of health and well-being than the younger slice. I mean, they have certainly heard of CBD, but the consumers are slightly older, what we see. And yeah, as I mentioned, they're very interested. They bring the background. They are probably also familiar with hemp from younger ages, but now see it being used in a different way and get adapted to it, and are quite interested.
And I think one of the important points to note here is that even though you see this age difference now, that's partly a reflection of this being a really young market. And so we saw something very similar on the THC sides of the US industry, where it initially began being a very dominated by young consumers. But now we're currently seeing the highest rate of adoption, the fastest rate of growth being amongst older consumers. So they may be slower to come into the market, but once they find ways to engage with these products, the adoption tends to be very intensive. There tends to be a lot of interest there. So building on that, around frequency of use, and building on the point I just made. So consumers between the age of 18 and 34 were nearly 4 times as likely to have used CBD than those over the age of 55. But if you look at who's consuming it at least once a day, it's actually those who are older consumers are much more likely to be regimented in their use. And I find that a really kind of fascinating perspective, because it tells you, or it gives you, starts to give you some indication about the different ways in which consumers are using these products, and why it's so important to understand who your target consumer is and why they're using it. Because older consumers are more likely to be using CBD in a medicinal way, in a more therapeutic way. They're more likely to be the regimented consumers. Whereas consumers who are more likely to be using it for wellness related reasons, for general wellness related reasons, rather than those specific medicinal reasons, are more likely to be less regimented, may consume it once to a few times a week, but it doesn't have that almost medicinal daily dosing approach that you would take if it was a pharmaceutical. Andrea and Stephanie, anything to add there?
No, actually nothing to add. That's we also see consumers taking our products for a certain time, then some of them stop for a couple of weeks, then restart again. So it's the form of consumption or the time of consumption is slightly varying, but in general, once they've tried it, they come back at some point. Normally, they take it for a reason. They see their conditions improving, so they stop. But then it takes quite some time before it goes back again, and then they restart taking our products.
Yep. And I think that's actually a good kind of affirmation also of the trial and error nature of the way in which consumers continue to use these products. We thought it really important to understand what drives consumers to buy CBD. So what are the most important purchase influencers? And we asked a range of testing dimensions. This is just the ones that appeared at the top of the list. And looking across this spectrum, so the price appeared at the top of all of consumers, but you see a really marked difference there by age, where younger consumers were much more likely to be price sensitive than older consumers. But then when you look at both the amount of CBD per serving and the total amount of CBD in a product, it actually inverts a little, where older consumers were much more likely to be interested in and focused on the formulation of the CBD than younger consumers. And that, I think, tells you a little bit both about the demographics, the socioeconomics, where perhaps older consumers may be less price sensitive, less price conscious. But also it harkens to this idea of the medicinal users are less likely to be price constrained if they're thinking about a product that they're using therapeutically, versus the wellness user who might be a little more flexible, a little more fluid in what they're choosing to consume. It is worth noting, across all of these dimensions, how many people reported that these dimensions were important. So as you think about whether it's price or the cannabinoid formulation, while those are the things that are leading their decision-making, there's opportunity to be differentiated by focusing on issues related to quality, so lab testing results, by focusing on the novel ingredients or the other ingredients that formulate the product. Even by being clear in how the dosing instructions are presented, how should this be consumed? What's the most appropriate consumption regimen? As such a young market, the need for the consumers are really hungry for information, and that creates a significant opportunity for companies and brands to differentiate themselves in using that information to capture the market. Frederick, I'd be interested to hear your perspective specifically on this idea of the formulation side of this market and the range of products that you're seeing emerging based on the types of cannabinoids and the formulation of or the potency of those cannabinoids.
No, I think it's a good point, right? Because what we've seen here over the last, call it year and a half, is many brands have tried to launch something that's quite similar, and now really most are starting to go down the route of I need to create something unique. And whether that is using other minor cannabinoids, is just introducing CBG into the mix and have that being a key part of the offering, or whether it's finding other ways to differentiate yourself by adding in vitamins or other things to the products. That's clearly the way it's going, right? Because we've seen a lot of very similar products being launched, and we can return to later how regulation could also be driving some of the future options you have in terms of cannabinoid profile in your formulations, meaning that it only becomes even more important that you find a way to differentiate your brand. And clearly here, obviously most brands focus on and clearly market their lab testing, how they work with dosing, et cetera. But I think that the time has also come for our industry now to start really growing up and presenting products in a proper way, whereas initially, you could pretty much put CBD on any label and you would generate some sales because of the initial interest, and competition is just getting tough now.
I think it's also something that we are seeing. It has always been our USP that quality is extremely important to us. We've been organic from the start, and a lot of consumers turn to us because they are looking for organic products. They are looking for something that has been grown outside, exposed to all the weather conditions, but still offers them the security that we have a safe product, which we are trying to do our best to provide all the certificates that we can get to give them a good feeling about our products.
So I'd like to pull on that thread, actually, Stephanie and Andrea. Could you talk a little bit about, how more broadly your differentiation strategy in the market? How do you think about setting your products apart in the market?
So basically, we continue doing what we've been doing the entire time since the company has been founded. Seeing all these shops opening. When you walk through Vienna, there's one street, I think you have
Yes.
5 or 6 shops, which is crazy to us because we're wondering where they are getting all their high quality organic CBD. But so we are still focusing, and that's what we are promoting, that we know where our hemp is grown, which is actually what we do. We just have to go outside, drive for 5 or 10 minutes, and then we see the fields. Yes, the extraction part, everything is in-house. We know all of our farmers, everyone, and that's what we are promoting at what makes our product so unique. And we see our customers appreciate that.
Yeah, and we are very deep inside the function of this plant and the ingredients of the plant. We know what CBD is doing in the body and how it's working on the body and all the other stuff from the hemp. And so I think this is very, very important if you get in contact with the customers, that you can make some kind of legal recommendation, because this is the story. We are not allowed to say something, but you can tell them, the customers, how they should start maybe a more healthy life if they take care of what they are eating, what they are doing, how where the products are coming from, and especially the hemp products are coming from. And in the future, we will have maybe a problem with synthetic cannabinoids coming on the market. And so it's very, very important that we tell them, okay, so the natural product in full spectrum hemp extract, this is the best for the body, and this is the best what you can take in. And because it has a synergy, all these ingredients have some synergies, and the entourage effect of the ingredients very, very important. And yes. So I think this is one of our USP, that we having a huge knowledge of how our products are affecting the body and the mind and the people's healthiness.
We had intended to touch on this earlier, but maybe because you've mentioned that point, Andrea, this would be a good time to talk about just some of the challenges in communicating and messaging to clients in Europe. This is such a kind of major issue in terms of the regulations and what the regulations do and do not allow in terms of your messaging. Could you talk a bit about, one, broadly what the restrictions are, and then two, how you actually go about doing that? How do you navigate this very constricted world of European marketing regulations for CBD?
Yeah, I think it's very complex, because we have different opinions from different parts. So we have a politician opinion in Europe, we have an expert opinion, and we have the opinion of the producers and the companies, the industry. They are growing hemp, they're producing hemp, and they have their hemp in the products. And it's very hard to get all this opinion from these different parties together. I think this is the biggest issue in the future. So, for example, we have a product on the market, and there's a big discussion of novel food. do you know, novel food is a product where you need to show that you need to register the product, and you need to show that the product is not non-toxic, have no bad effect on the body of the customers. And it takes a long time, it's very expensive, and then you have just one stuff on the market or one product on the market, and it's very, very difficult for this huge industry to survive if ich muss mal ein bisschen helfen. If the regulation from the EU will go this way, that we have that they decided that we only have to have a novel food on the market. And we believe that our product is not a novel food because it's coming from the hemp, from a natural plant, and the only thing what we are doing is to make an extraction and then mix it with some oil and bring it to the market. So all the ingredients what we in our products are completely natural. It's not novel, it's not new, and this is the discussion. And yes, and it will take time, and it will take a lot of money. We are paying to the lawyers to get a resolution for everybody in Europe and all the companies.
So basically, that's our biggest challenge and issue that we're facing on a day-to-day communication. Regulations being a bit unstable for now, not knowing in which direction we are moving, different regulations in different countries of Europe. This also makes it even more challenging, but we are still trying to direct consumers in certain directions. We are not allowed to say anything because there are no existing health claims for our products, but we get good feedback. We have a lot of, let's say, case studies of consumers that love our product, that are so happy actually that they found us, but we're not allowed to say anything. So as I mentioned, there are a lot of
So to clarify, Stephanie, you're saying you're not even allowed to use consumer reviews as a way to market your product?
Yes,
exactly. We had, I say, handwritten reviews on our website, but we were forced to take them down last year because there is a direct link between health-orientated, basically a health claim, which we can't prove, so we had to take them down, and it has been really disappointing for us because these were real testimonies by consumers. But it's okay, we accept that for now. We are trying everything we can to be able to say more, and we still find ways around to show what our products are good for. So basically what we are doing, we let people know if you want to feel good in the morning, you need a good night's sleep. So we're not saying that our products might help you sleep better, but we're just telling you what you could change in your life to feel better, to be more productive, have more energy.
A quick comment from me on what you were saying, Andrea, regarding novel foods, and that can easily take up the entire time here. We'll be discussing that. But I like the view, my view, and also what we've been doing at Mile High, right, is that the EFSA made it quite clear that this is a novel ingredient. Did that about a year ago, and I think it's you can always argue, it can come from different sources, etc. But I think really the regulation is laid out quite clearly, and we need to comply with this to be able to really, the clear regulatory path has been laid out for how we comply in Europe and how we go that direction. And that's also why we have as a business have submitted our novel food application for our CBD isolate. And quite clearly, there are many different school of thoughts in terms of how does that affect the body? Do you get the best effect of it? I'm not going to comment on any of that, but I think we have, if you want to sell compliantly in Europe, that the path is relatively clear. And then the UK specifically has has made it even, you can say, even relatively easier for us as an industry, in that we don't even need a fully authorized application. We can get validated, and that would be sufficient in the short term to remain compliant in the UK. But I appreciate that this could lead to a larger discussion. I'll leave it up to you, John, if you want to have that now, or if we save it for later.
Let's put a pin on that, just because I do want to get through a couple of other themes. But I've actually been watching the conversation, or the questions they've been streaming in. There's going to be a lot of questions specifically around EU regulation, so I'd like to put a pin on that. And just a point for our attendees, since we've had a number of people ask this. One, a recording will be made available to all registrants, so don't worry if you're not able to scribble your notes through the course of this. A recording and a copy of the deck will be made available. And then two, please continue to post your questions here. We are going to be weaving them into the conversation over the next 30 minutes. So we welcome your perspectives. So we thought it interesting to try and understand the different reasons why consumers are using CBD, and we grouped them into broadly 4 main buckets: general wellness, unwinding, pain management, and medical. And broadly speaking, these groups actually worked out fairly neatly, where the groups made up, roughly a quarter of each of these segments. Unwinding was the largest group, and that includes people who are using CBD for relaxation, anxiety, stress relief. With the other 3 groups all being about proportional. General wellness, improving overall health, as Stephanie just said, helping people fall asleep and helping improve the quality of their sleep. So not only helping you fall asleep, but helping you stay asleep longer. Improving your mood, being more energized. On the pain management, now pain was one of the unique ones, because that was such a distinct, unique category that we thought it was important that we segregate that from other quote unquote medical reasons. So pain management made up about 23% of our respondents, but you had this other kind of medical group where people were using it to treat other medical conditions, or interestingly, to manage the negative effects of other medications. So, this idea of almost like if you're a cancer patient and you're experiencing acute physiological response to chemotherapy, using CBD to alleviate some of these conditions. Also seeing patients using it for GI distress and to reduce their spending on other medications. The point here is this. As you look at the way these 4 main groups, these are really diversified, really fragmented ways in which consumers are using CBD. And for the brands that are thinking about targeting or deploying in the European market, we think it's increasingly important that you transition from the mindset of a one-size-fits-all product mode to one where you have an acute understanding of which specific subgroup of consumers you're targeting, and understanding what is animating the use and the purchase decisions for those groups. That's really important, because as this market continues to grow and expand, and we expect it to grow substantially in the coming years, complex rules notwithstanding, the one-size-fits-all brands are going to find it increasingly difficult to challenge the companies that are much more laser focused on individual subgroups, and who are tailoring not just their offerings, but their messaging, their marketing, and their retail distribution to those specific groups. Maybe for the deep nature group, anything to add specifically to this diversity of reasons for use that we're starting to see emerging in this market?
Actually, no, that's what what our insights are as well. It's great to see our own insights confirmed. Still, we are facing the issue of not being able to tell anything to our consumers. Actually, my life could be so much more easier, but it's quite tricky to find ways to educate people without telling them, take our product for certain conditions. So, but it's actually what we get as well. In terms of feedback, why people are taking our products.
And maybe just a thought about the challenge of trying to navigate within the rules as they're defined is, One, if it was easy, everybody would be doing it. And so there's an opportunity to use really creative approaches to engage the market now. And if you're able to successfully engage your target audiences now, we think that the foundation laid today will make it much easier to build a durable, competitive brand over the long term as the market begins to mature and become increasingly competitive.
I think yeah. No, keep going.
And just kind of building on this point that there are meaningful differences across ages as you think about these four main user types: general wellness, unwinding, pain management, medical. And so first, looking at the younger consumers who are much more likely to be using CBD to unwind. So 35% of those 18 to 34 were using it for unwinding, compared to 17% of those over 55. But the inverse is true. When you look specifically at pain management, only 17% of those, which is the blue, only 17% of those 18 to 34 were using it for pain management, compared to almost twice that number amongst those over 55. Not to belabor the point, but we can't stress enough that age is just one dimension by which you can understand your consumers, but it's really an important one because it gives you a good base of understanding of what's animating these consumer uses. Now, for this part, we wanted to explore this idea of brand loyalty. And we wanted to understand how brand loyalty, so the propensity to buy the same brand over and over, how that correlated to the different types of users that we're seeing across those four groups. A great example here of the differences that you see between medical consumers and the rest of the market. The medical consumers, once they have found their brand, 53% of them said they're locked in. They're always going to buy the same brand. Whereas only 28% of those who were using it for general wellness were that intensely brand loyal. And then looking at the second box there in yellow, I buy new brands at least as often as I buy familiar brands, where you had 30% of the general wellness consumer who were the most willing to try and experiment with new brands on the market. I took two takeaways from this. One, around this idea of the medical patient being a regimented user. The medical patients are the ones who are going to be locked in. So if you're creating products aimed at, quote unquote, the medical consumer, you're much more likely to experience brand loyalty, assuming the product does what the patient expects it to. So if the product works, there's a strong propensity there to drive brand loyalty. But also the inverse of that, for companies that are developing products aimed at the general wellness consumer, and maybe to a lesser extent the consumers who are using it to unwind, be prepared for this market to be really competitive, because consumers have not yet kind of locked into a steady state of use, and therefore you're seeing broad receptivity to seeing what else is new, what's on this market. Let me see if this new product works. And so you have to be much more proactive in locking in your customers and ensuring that they stay engaged. Just because they've bought from you once doesn't mean they're going to keep buying from you. And so you've got to stay ahead of them and keep coming back to them to ingratiate that loyalty in a way that you might not necessarily need to do with a medical consumer. For either of our panelist groups, anything to add there?
I think it's just quite interesting that, I saw some data around probably 6 months, eight months ago that indicated relatively high consumer loyalty. And once they've tried a brand, they will stick with it. So this is the first time we've seen it to an as granular level as you presented here. But I think that also just goes to show how this industry is developing, right? There's so many trying to compete for the same customers, or for new customers that are adopting this who hadn't tried it before, who just don't have that loyalty. So I think it's interesting data. It feels like it's changed over the course of the last year.
No question. And that's part of the reason why we intend to continue to keep coming back to this market. It's such a dynamic environment that you can't continue to rely on data from 2 years ago just because of how quickly the space is evolving.
Yeah.
So to round out our portrait of the consumers in Europe, as we have done with other parts of the cannabis market, we took all of the data from Europe and applied some deep quantitative analysis using, I believe, over 150 variables to try and identify defined clusters, defined consumer archetypes within this market. And we came up with these 5 clusters: exuberant and intense, the integrative and consistent, skeptical and limited, receptive but reserved, and then ambivalent and experimental. These archetypes broadly define the entire consumer market. And I think they're the really elegant way to give brands a way of understanding the broad consumer groups. I'm not going to read kind of in detail what makes up each of these. Hopefully the names themselves give you a good indication of who the consumers are within them. But I'll start maybe with just a quick portrait of the exuberant and intense. These are the most passionate, most kind of intensively consuming consumers. They've used CBD in a variety of forms. They use it most frequently. They have overwhelmingly positive views of CBD. And are very kind of strongly positively supportive of expanding access to the market. Maybe contrast that, for example, with the skeptical and limited. The skeptical and limited are, they're moderately sized group, they're about 20% of the market. They consume with moderate frequency and they have a mostly positive. So these are not kind of overwhelming flag waving CBD consumers, but they have a generally positive view of CBD. But they're a little skeptical about whether CBD does have a lot of medical efficacy. And critically, they're the least likely to support CBD being kind of widely available to anybody who might want it, arguing that there needs to be some rules and regulations around how CBD should be dispensed. Those are 2 pretty diverse kind of and segregated consumer groups, consumer perspectives. And the reason why I call those 2 out in particular is it's really important to understand that in an increasingly fragmenting market, an increasingly diversifying market, a one-size-fits-all is not going to work when you have consumers who hold such varied and variable views of CBD and of CBD's efficacy. So maybe to Andrea and Stephanie, I'd be interested in your perspective about this idea of the fragmenting kind of CBD consumer, the diversity of portraits that you're seeing amongst the CBD consumer groups.
I want to say it's absolutely reasonable and understandable, and also what we see. You have those who are familiar with the products, who take it, those who are a bit skeptical, but have heard good things from friends and colleagues. So it is a very broad range of consumers and potential consumers, which makes it even more difficult, as you mentioned, to find the right communication within the limited or the restricted field. But yes, there is a lot of need to educate people on why to take CBD. And keep coming back to that point that we are very limited in what we're allowed to say, I know, but that's our daily business. But still, even those who hear good things about CBD find ways to get some information. For us, it's more, the most important part is to make people understand that they need to buy high quality products, because not everything, as we were seeing earlier, there are a lot of shops who are selling CBD. We have our own lab here. We have analyzed a couple of these products. Interesting findings, actually. Starts with very low CBD dosage, etc. But people need to, not only for CBD or hemp, but in general, to understand that quality in food and food supplements is so extremely important. And you better pay maybe a more pricier product, or buy a more pricier product, than start with something that has basically no effect, or even some negative side effects because it's not organically grown or whatever.
Yeah, fair. Then maybe just a final point around the diversity of consumers. And here you see 3 illustrations of the diversity of views across the archetypes that we have come up with. Which groups are most likely to consume CBD at least once a day? You can see that the exuberant and intense are twice as likely. 82% of them consume daily, which is twice as much as the next closest group, the integrative and consistent. So looking at the chart there on the left. And compare that to 29% of the average consumer who consumes once a day. So exuberant and intense, very, very kind of deep and deeply integrated into their CBD use. Views on CBD's impact on consumers' own lives. 2 groups here led, exuberant and intense and integrative and consistent, where 90% plus viewed that or reported that they thought CBD had a positive effect on their lives. And you had, only 58% of those who were skeptical and limited, 54% of those who were ambivalent report the same thing. Again, understanding who these consumers are, I think, is really important. And then our final point about whether CBD should be widely available, whether it should require a doctor's recommendation. The skeptical and limiteds really were the one group where this really stood out. Only 44% felt that CBD should be widely available, whereas the majority of all other groups felt that that should be the case. And so while the majority of our European consumers, 76% overall, think that CBD should be widely available, that's not a consensus view amongst all consumers. And so, understand that if there happens to be skeptical and limited archetypes within your target consumer base. Now, we have a great deal of more of these insights in the report. We'll provide a link to the report at the end of the webinar, but we want to get to this discussion. And we've been seeing some terrific questions coming in from the audience. Please do keep them coming. One of the questions that I thought maybe would be a good jumping off point here is around extraction techniques. And so for the Deep Nature team and for Frederick, can you talk about what extraction techniques you use to produce your CBD? There's been a lot of innovation happening in that space, and we've seen a couple of questions around those techniques from our audience.
Yes, well, if you stay in organic products, there are no so many techniques available at right now. We developed, so we do mostly CO2 extraction in the first step. Mm-hmm. And then we developed our own extraction method, or for the second and the third step in the in the refinery of our concentrate. We did have our own techniques developed in the last 4 or 5 years, and we use mainly ethanol for the extraction, because our process is organic certified from the first step on to the last step.
Frederick, what are you guys using at Mile High?
We're doing ethanol extraction. We just found it to be the most scalable for the quantities we process.
Another group of questions I've seen here is around this distinction between the CBD rules in the UK versus the CBD rules in the rest of Europe. And now, Frederick, I know you've done a lot of work on this. You're based in the UK. Could you talk about maybe 2 parts of it? One, just a high-level view of what you see as the major distinctions between the way the rules are manifest in the UK versus the way they manifest in the rest of Europe. And then 2, talk a bit about the process Mile High Labs went through to submit your novel foods designation or application to the UK.
So the key differentiator between the UK and Europe is as such that the UK has allowed this grace period for businesses to become compliant, whereas we've seen in Austria, we've seen in Spain, and to some extent Germany, right, that products are being taken off shelves if they're not fully novel food approved. The UK earlier this year came out and said you have until 31st of March 2021 to have an application submitted and validated, and reaching the validation phase is step one on your way to becoming fully approved. The way the process works is you submit your application. The regulator will read it and ensure that you've essentially filled out all the blanks and you have an application of sufficient quality to go under review. And from there, you then reach this validation phase, which is as I said, the key requirement in the UK now, and where everyone wants to get to by 31st of March next year. Whereas in the rest of Europe, as such, it's still a gray area whether you need to be, like in certain countries, it's very clear you need full authorization, and in other countries, it's still a gray area whether they're going to enforce it or not. And we at Mile High, we started the work on this application around 11 months ago now, in conjunction with it was around the time when the CMC in the UK, the Centre for Medicinal Cannabis, published a UK specific survey and data around the CBD markets, and the FSA attended that and made it clear to us that they did view CBD as novel and that they were eventually going to start enforcing this. And from then we started the work on our application. I saw one of the questions here in the Q&A was why we are doing it for our isolate only. The reason is you need toxicology data. So there are two parts of a novel food application. It's consistent manufacturing practices. So you log in the process that you extract that, so you have a consistent product. And then you need toxicology data that shows that it's safe for human consumption. And it's so much more straightforward doing for an isolate where you only as such have one compound left, an isolated cannabinoid. Whereas, we, for instance, also sell and market in Europe a broad spectrum distillate. This distillate, for example, is 85% CBD and around 9% other cannabinoids. For us to do a novel food application for a broad spectrum like that, we would need to map out precisely how much of each other cannabinoid is in the distillate going forward every time. So it's very hard, it's very restrictive around how you then need to manufacture a very consistent product going forward. But we would also need toxicology data on how each individual cannabinoid in that profile affects the body in harmonization with everything else. And then the final challenge with novel food application for a broad spectrum is also THC levels. It still hasn't been clarified what level of THC the EFSA will approve, if any, in a novel food approved CBD product. And therefore, again, isolate is just a much more straightforward way to go. So the way, this is not me, this is our VP of Regulatory and Compliance, Wendy Young. She views it as a very long-term process of getting a novel food approved broad spectrum or full spectrum, but it would likely be, it could likely be done, but it would take a while. And final point is then that we submitted our food application just over a month ago, and are now so we submitted it to the EFSA and have submitted directly to the EFSA here in the UK as well, and are now dealing with the regulators in terms of first getting to the validated stage and then down the line getting becoming approved, so we can distribute our ingredient across Europe. And importantly as well, this is on an ingredient level. This is not on a finished product level. We as a business can then supply an ingredient to manufacturers that they can go and manufacture with under some guidelines, and that way do novel food compliant products.
I think one of the topics that is quite interesting, we have a different approach than Frederick from product perspective, because isolate is one thing, and if this is legal and available for everyone and we're allowed to talk about it, it's great. But we as a company still believe in full spectrum products, because we see that the synergies of the different components of the hemp extract are so important, and we get such great feedback from our consumers who take the full spectrum product. So we have a different approach. Our approach is to prove that this is not novel food. This is something that has been consumed for for ages actually. So this is a different approach, and this makes also the regulations difficult for us in a different way.
My challenge to that would just be that I feel like that ship to some extent has sailed, in that the EFSA have ruled this as novel. So the path to them changing their opinion could be quite long. I know that that's what IHA is working on, etc. But I don't know how that's going to fare. We are trying to be compliant with the rules as they are now. And as for the effectiveness of a broad spectrum or full spectrum versus isolate, I haven't seen many studies that point one way or another. I fully agree with you that we hear many stories of and talks of entourage effect and how it might work better, and that might well be the case. I don't know, but our focus is just delivering a compliant solution with whatever rules we're given to play by.
That's absolutely understandable, and
Yeah,
it's a great start. Still, we are not giving up, and we have a great legal department as well, and a lot of people who are in there to, I don't want to say fight, but who are trying to convince people that what we're doing is not something bad, not something illegal. Quite to the contrary, we want to bring it on the table. We want to make people understand that only by bringing it in the spotlight, you have the ability of creating a safe product for everyone. We haven't given up yet, so we're still trying. But I don't want to say that the one approach or the other approach is the right one. We just have different approaches.
yeah, that's right. And I think we are acting on the EU level on a holistic way. So I think this novel food catalog is only a recommendation or an opinion of a part of the EFSA, and you need to prove it for each different individual product. And we are really, our opinion is that hemp, it's of course, it could be not novel, and it's very, very important for all of the people in Europe, because on the other hand, if we now going into a novel food registration and we have only one product, we will lose so many different possibilities and a huge potential on the hemp market. It's not okay what they are doing, and so this is our way to go on a more holistic acting or doing together with our authorities here in Austria on the national base and on the EU level. That's a little bit different.
Yeah, no, but also just one thing I would clarify is that novel foods is on an ingredient level. It's not on a finished product level. And I think that is causing a lot of that is in itself is also a discussion point for for many, and I think quite a few will disagree on whether it needs to be a product level or not, because quite a few now also in the UK think we need to do an individual novel food application for each product. It's our view that that's not the case. It's the ingredient level. Novel foods, but any standard food manufacturer in the European Union that's been around for a while, they will likely have worked with novel food ingredients, right? Whether it is a dairy company bringing out a new yogurt where they introduce a new ingredient, they need to comply with the rules of using that ingredient in a consistent way. And as such, it would be the same way we look at our CBD, that provide an ingredient that is then safe. You then need to work with it under some parameters of ensuring stability and ensuring that the product doesn't degrade in whatever mix you put it in. But as long as you do that, you would as such be compliant under the application that has been done for that particular ingredient. But yeah, no, that's our interpretation of how this is done.
So I think this is a perfect, perhaps just a pausing point, because it underscores just the complexity of navigating the European market. And this is unlike the North American markets, where the rules were much more relaxed. There's a lot more flexibility and agility allowed for operators to create products and get them to customers. The EU market is much more regulatory complex. And clearly there's, even amongst high-performing organizations like Deep Nature Project and Mile High Labs, slightly different interpretations of what the rules might mean for the way this industry operates. So this is a great discussion, and I don't want to end it prematurely. We're at the top of the hour. This webinar was scheduled for 1 hour, but as we do when we have a ton of questions and a highly engaged audience and great panelists, we sometimes offer an additional extra time, and I would ask if our panelists are able to stay on for a few extra minutes to get through some of the additional questions that we have, given that we have most of our attendees still here and continuing to rapid fire questions.
Yeah, happy to stay.
So for those of you who need to drop off, I'll just show you the contact information for our 3 panelists. And I would like to thank Stephanie, Andrea, and Frederick for the fantastic perspectives, for the very rich discussion. The copy of the second EU CBD report that we have produced, Segments and Archetypes, is available from newfrontierData.com/Equio. Where you can access not just this report, but every other report that we produced about the European market, as well as all of the other global research that New Frontier provides on the cannabis industry. Now, to resume our extra time conversation, Stephanie and Andrea, I'm really interested in your perspective. So you talked about sourcing all of your cannabis or all of your hemp from organic sources. I'd like you to learn a little bit more about your supply chain. Where are you getting your hemp from, and what does the supply chain look like getting the product to you? And then the second part is, where are you selling your CBD products? What are the retail channels that you're using to sell your CBD?
Okay, we have a very close partnership with our farmers. We telling them what they should grow, which kind of sort strain they should grow in their field, which kind of soil they should use, how they should grow the hemp. Then we have a station where we make the harvest, the drying, and the separation of the hemp. We have the stems, the leaves, and the seeds. So we make from the seeds, we make our organic seeds. We make our oil and our proteins. And from the leaves, we are harvesting and drying and separating. We make our tea and the hemp extract. We grow. Last year, we had 800 hectares hemp fields in Germany with a close partner in Germany, here in Austria, and in Croatia. And so, because we need to go on different areas, because maybe of the climate is changing. Here in Austria, I have a very dry climate. In northern Germany, it's also very dry, but normally it's a little bit more rainy over there. So we have also a little bit different ingredients and a different quality what we're growing in different regions in Europe. And well, then we have a huge storage hole, and then we ship the material to the CO2 extraction or the ethanol extraction, and then we make all the processing in-house and do here the final mixing and the final product. And the selling is your part.
Yes, it's a mixture of online, brick and mortar. We have our own shop, our own online store. We have a small shop here. We are working closely with a lot of stores from the HFS. So basically, it's quite diverse, and there are new countries and new retail chains coming, becoming partner of us. So it's ever changing, actually. We have some very active key account colleagues. And it's actually great because it is so diverse, and there is not just one retail chain we are working with, or the one online shop. There is a lot of online shops with different approaches. It's quite interesting, actually, on a daily basis.
So just on that, what proportion of your business is online versus brick and mortar now, whether it's brick and mortar, your own store or other stores that you're selling through?
It's 50% about it's online, and the rest is on the retail.
And just
maybe changing now.
Yes, it's changing now because of the crisis. But yeah, it's growing now, and we want to
growing on which side? On the online side?
Online side, yes.
Before the crisis, were you seeing a difference in spending and transaction size between the online buyer and the brick and mortar buyer? So how much they were spending per transaction between the two channels, or was the spending roughly equivalent?
No, actually, no. Of course, we see a difference compared to our own online shop because it's focused on our product, focused on hemp extract. So we see a slightly higher spending, but between the others, no, not really.
I'm so glad, Andrea, that you mentioned the crisis, because we can't talk about the cannabis environment, the cannabinoid ecosystem, without talking about the impact of COVID-19 on the industry. And so to all of you, I'm really interested in your perspectives on the impact that COVID-19 has had on the work that you're doing and on the industry from your perspectives. And so maybe for Deep Nature, I'd love to hear your perspective on what impact you're seeing it having on the way consumers are interacting with CBD or the type of engagement. And then Frederick, I'd love your perspective on, more broadly, what are you seeing kind of on the supply chain and on the industry as it lays the foundation for a CBD market in Europe?
Yeah. At the moment, we don't have any problems with our supply chains, because as this crisis started, we ordered a lot of every stuff what we need for the production. So we have a lot of our classes and pipettes on stock, and but we will see also in the future we will not have a problem with the supply chain in any case. We had, I think at the moment it's too early to say something how the crisis will impact our future business. I'm very optimistic and positive, so I will see an increasing in sales for our products, because in the last few weeks we heard there were some news going around the world that CBD is helping in some aspect for and protect you from the virus. And so if this message will increase and go around the world, the people would, of course, buy hemp extract and CBD oil. So I'm very positive for the future. And at the moment, because we are growing since we starting with our business, and we grow also this year and the last weeks and months. So we don't have at the moment a big impact, huge impact for the crisis. Yeah, is that right?
Yeah, what we see is actually people are even more turning to understand how to maintain a healthy life. What are the products that I could take to improve my health, especially with staying home a lot, being less exposed to sunlight. We all know that this is also being isolated, being less outside is not good for the immune system. So people are even more interested in understanding how your body is functioning. What can I do to improve it? What is the food that I'm allowing to enter my body? What supplements can I take? So we do see that and trust that people will keep buying our products. Of course, depending on the economic, there might be a shift in spending, but we need to wait a couple more weeks. For now, we are rather optimistic.
Great. Frederick, we've talked about this a few times, but I'd love for you to share your perspective on the impact of this crisis on the business of CBD? As the industry lays this foundation in Europe, what are you seeing as some of the impacts?
I would agree that the supply chain has as such for now remained relatively unchanged and unchallenged. But where we've really seen the impact is obviously on the brand side. Big move to online. The brands that didn't have a big online presence are challenged now. There are some in the UK, for instance, that have pretty much solely distribution in retail, and obviously this time has been extremely tough there. But overall, I've been very positively surprised by the resilience of the businesses we work with. Also, how our business has continued to perform through this. Demand has remained high, and I think that's also the effect of this industry being relatively young and run by a lot of very driven entrepreneurs who won't take who won't sit down as a result of a crisis and really pushing through. So even in we've kind of seen it in a way throughout Europe and then also in the States. Delivering obviously pretty much globally, that the European countries such as Austria, Germany, Switzerland, and Scandinavia were quick to shut down, and we saw an impact in early March from there. And we pretty much then just seen a wave come through where the US now is experiencing more of the slowdown and starting to pick up a little bit again, it seems. Whereas continental Europe has been going pretty much in a way from east to west in terms of slowing down and then slowly starting to reopen.
I would just add, coming back to the reasons for use slide, which I think is actually really important. As we think about the reasons, one of the reasons why we think there's a lot of resilience baked into the CBD market opportunity. Look at the column for unwinding. What reasons people are using it? Relaxation, anxiety reduction, stress relief, under general wellness, increasing overall numbness, help falling asleep, help staying asleep. Now, if we put that in the context of this period of acute stress, acute economic upheaval that our global society is going through as a result of COVID-19, there's a lot of intersectionality between the reasons why people use CBD and improving the mental and health outcomes of people who are dealing with the stresses of being cooped up at home, the stresses of job losses, not being able to work, not getting paid. And so we think there's actually a really robust opportunity for cannabis writ large, for CBD specifically, to help alleviate some of the distresses that have been associated with this acute moment of upheaval. And I think that's been one of the accelerants or anchors that has helped ensure a almost recession-proof nature of this market at a time when you have so many other sectors of the consumer economy being massively disrupted. And we think this is going to be a durable trend. And coming out of this, we expect that there will be a large number of consumers who will have increased, at least moderately, some of their use of cannabinoids during this period of shelter in place and lockdown orders, and will continue to maintain that use even as we come out of this. So I think a strong growth opportunity emerging from this period of acute disruption. So I want to be mindful of how much time we're going through, but maybe two questions here that I found compelling. One, what are your perspectives on the high CBD versus low CBD dose products? And are you seeing, what trends are you seeing in terms of demand for products that have very high levels of CBD versus products that are quote unquote more, say, microdose? Any insights that that either of you could share on that?
Quickly, just on in our novel food application, we are recommending a maximum daily dosage of 70 milligrams. That is that's on the basis of, that was the same thing that the FSA also guided to in their announcement earlier in the year. And it's based off a pretty simple, we went through their methodology, and it's pretty much based off, an average adult person weighing around 70 kilos and then taking 1 milligram per kilogram a day. And I think, if you look at the toxicology work that Epidiolex did, you can take significantly higher amounts, but that's also for an actual medicine. It's not for wellness purposes. So I think, you know, you can easily sell, say, a tincture that contains a lot of CBD or another product that contains a lot, but you will likely in the future, along with becoming novel food compliant, then also have to recommend a maximum daily intake to your customers. What we are seeing in terms of demand, in terms of how much do you take in one dosage, like whether that is one soft gel or you know, a tincture or whatever, generally around the 30 milligrams seems to be where a lot of the demand from brands come in terms of what they want to get. Say whether that is then taken through a tincture or yeah, you eat a gummy containing 30 milligrams of CBD. That is pretty broad across that spectrum. But that's what we're seeing at the moment.
We offer different products with different amounts of CBD. We don't believe in the higher the amount, the better the product. So we recommend our consumers to start with a lower dosage and see where their personal well-being starts, actually. I mean, if you could easily tell them, take the higher amount and could sell them high-priced products, but that's not our approach. We want to help them, and because each person's endocannabinoid system is on a different level, there is no such thing as telling someone you take that amount of CBD and then you're fine. I mean, we have a colleague who's working in our lab. He's tall. He's a real strong man, and I think he's more sensitive to CBD than Andrea. And Andrea is petite, I want to say.
Yes,
so it's really it depends on the person, and yeah.
And this is the reason why we need to talk a lot to the people and to the customer. And yeah, it's very important that the customer and the people are feeling well with the dosage. And it's for me, when I start the business, and I tried a lot different dosage on myself. And there is a broad, as a band wide, where you feel pretty well with this product, but you can take too less, or of course you can also take too much. And it's very important that you find it out by yourself in which kind or how much CBD you should take by yourself.
I think a strong affirmation here that there's a lot more science to be done on the intersection of cannabinoids and the human physiology. You know, we know of a number of companies who are doing some really groundbreaking work around human genetics and the endocannabinoid system and its the receptivity or susceptibility for people to when they consume cannabis. It is true that we all have different endocannabinoid systems, and therefore we all process cannabis differently. And you know, we envision that over the next decade, one of the points of dramatic innovation is going to be, as we better understand how our genetic footprints influence our cannabis susceptibility, brands, research and development companies will become much more able to effectively develop products that are aligned with our individual ECSs and create recommendations that optimize our cannabis ingestion. We're still a long way from that happening, but we think that some of that research has begun and seems quite promising. Now, in the interest of time, maybe in the couple of minutes that we have left before we close, I'd love to hear from all of you, your perspectives on what's coming next. What are the major issues, themes, or trends that your companies are looking at as you look out at the next 12 to 24 months in the European market? And critically, what excites you the most about what's coming down the pipe?
I can go first. I think in terms of exciting progress, I think, as with every market, and we continue screening globally for where we can enter and where we can deliver product. Regulation is the main driver, and it's going to remain so here in Europe as well. Novel foods is obviously only relevant for ingestibles, so we continue seeing what happens with topicals, cosmetics, et cetera. We also now have development in France that could potentially open up for extracts that are from the flower as well. So we could potentially have a brand new market with large population, that would be very interesting to look at. And then I think where, much to the point of what we've been discussing, differentiation is probably one of the keywords in where this industry is going now, and looking at the brand side. And that means that we can take part in developing some pretty cool products for a lot of new brands from the CBD space, but also this more clarity on regulation will allow for some of the larger FMCG to enter this space and launch their versions. And the prospect of working with some of them is super exciting for me.
Yeah, I mean, it will be interesting in general to see how the industry is developing, how the economy is doing after we get out of our current crisis. So there are a lot of factors that we can't weigh in for now, but we are excited to follow through with our path. We still believe that what we're doing is the right way. We hope that regulations shift slightly in our direction, but it will be interesting. We're still very positive. We have a lot of products in our pipeline. We're also looking left and right. We're not only hemp orientated, but that is our foundation, and we wanna continue on that path. But our main goal is to keep people healthy, with be it hemp or be it another ingredient. We want to help them maintain a good lifestyle, a healthy lifestyle, and prevent them from getting ill or getting sick. So yeah, we are quite excited for the next months. Our company is growing, the teams are growing. We have even been able to add 3 more people to the marketing team during the quarantine. So it's really quite interesting times for us. And yeah.
Yes.
Well, as we say in cannabis often, nothing if not interesting times.
Yes.
I hope for our attendees, and I'm delighted to see that we've had so many of our attendees stay on for this extra time conversation. I hope one of the takeaways here is that while there is phenomenal opportunity in the European market, it's not one that's without its risks. And so having good counsel to help you navigate these evolving rules and regulations, paying very close attention to the rules as they evolve, getting involved in advocacy to ensure that the way these regulators are promulgating these rules are aligned with your values and the ways, the opportunities you'd like to capitalize on this market. And finally, understanding who the consumers are all going to be critical factors to being successful in this market. While the EU market is certainly not one that is going to be easy to navigate, it is one that, with a population of 750 million, presents phenomenal opportunity for growth, one which we expect to see access to CBD increase significantly over time. And as we've seen from these data, there's a great deal of interest, both growing and current demand amongst consumers, and that's only going to continue to grow. So as you think about these opportunities, we hope you'll access the reports that Deep Nature and Mile High Labs have sponsored and produced by New Frontier Data that provide robust insight into the emerging opportunities in this market. And we hope that you'll join us for our future webinars as we continue to draw from our panelists' extraordinary insights and experience on the trends, opportunities, challenges, and phenomenal future that lies ahead for CBD in Europe. I'd like to thank Frederick Hendrickson of Mile High Labs, Andrea Bramaka and Stephanie Brixen from the Deep Nature Project for the terrific insights and for the great engagement through this. Our panelists, thank you for the great questions for the duration of this 90 minutes. And we look forward to seeing you again very soon on our next webinar on the EU CBD market. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Stay healthy, everybody.
Yes, please do. In this COVID environment, please take care of yourselves and each other.
Thank
Thank you.